The government is going to roll out 50-year mortgage loans and 15-year car loans and stimulus checks. What is going on? Does the government want us to own anything on this slice of fresh bread? Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 126. And today, we are going to talk a little finance as Pastor Brandon. I'm Pastor Keith. He's Pastor Brandon. We're going to talk a little bit about, does the government want us to own anything? Like, what is going on? We just had Donald Trump come out, President Trump, talk about a 50-year mortgage loans. He's talking about 15-year car loans. He's talking about handing out stimulus checks. What is going on? What is happening here? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. What does the Bible say? We know Proverbs 22 talks about the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. And so is this a good thing to have 50-year mortgages and 15-year car loans? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So Pastor Brandon, what do you think? Is this a good idea that we have 50-year mortgages and 15-year car loans? And are we asked a question, does the government really want us to own anything? What's going on?
Well, I mean, the short answer is no. I guess we can be over with the show. Neither are good. And, obviously we want to do more discussion on it and give the reason why. But the short answer is no, it's not good. You basically are enslaving people to debt. And the problem with the 50-year loan, I mean, there's multiple problems with the 50-year loan. But in terms of on an individual basis, you're paying a higher interest rate in order to get these longer terms. And that's the same thing with car loans, where they're going, used to 4 or 5 years was kind of the standard for a car loan, which sort of made sense because, cars would last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you could get 100,000 miles out of a car and you could get about, 20,000 miles a year. That's 100,000 miles. And so it sort of made sense that would be the terms. But nowadays the terms are 84 months, 96 months. I don't know what the most is at this point. But the way that they do that is they spread it out over a longer time, but you end up paying more interest. You end up paying a higher percentage, and you end up paying for that because they're not getting their money as quickly, and you end up paying total interest. If you pay out the loan, you're paying way more than you would on a shorter term. And so, as Christians, we ought to avoid those types of things because, we don't need the biggest houses. We don't need the biggest, nicest cars. We need what we need, in terms of just living our lives. But we shouldn't be, if we can't afford to pay for a more expensive car without having to spread it out over, or a more expensive house without having to spread it over these longer terms, I don't think that's certainly not something that's going to put you in a position where you're financially independent of debt in that way.
Let's talk a little bit about when you extend loans, like 15-year car loan. I was going to ask you, do cars even last 15 years? I mean, that seems like a long time.
Some cars, yes. I mean, if you take care of it, and the modern cars are pretty high quality, and if you take care of it, I can see easily cars lasting 15 years. We drove our Yukon. My family had a Yukon that we had for I think 12 or 13 years, and we sold it, and it was still in decent shape. We could have continued to use it if we wanted to, but we just didn't need that big car anymore. So it was just so expensive to drive that we decided to get rid of it. And so. Yeah, I mean, you can take care of cars and get that kind of mileage out of them. Your car is probably closing in or even more than 15 years old. I don't know what the year model is, but
2006 is
yeah. Now, there are cars that I would never recommend. I don't think in general it's a good idea to go, more than something reasonable, maybe 4 or 5 years. I could even see 72 months on a newer car that's good quality, but people are going even more than that, but they're buying vehicles that the quality isn't as good. And quality has actually decreased over the past probably since COVID for sure. Cars are not being made as well. As a matter of fact, part of it is because they are using thinner oils in the cars, for fuel mileage, and they're also putting turbos on cars to increase the power with a smaller engine. So therefore, you get better gas mileage. And so, but turbos cause a lot of heat and create problems in the engine. So you get less time on it. So, yeah, buying a car is a losing option. It's something it's somewhat of a necessity in the modern world. And I love the idea that we have car ownership, which gives us independence. But it is a losing proposition. You don't make money. You don't generally make money as just someone who buys a car and drives it. You don't generally make money. You just have varying degrees of how much money you're going to spend. And if you're smart and you buy something that's just practical and something that gets good fuel economy and is high quality, and you take care of it, if you're smart in how you take care of it, then it costs you less than if you don't do those things.
Yeah, and I think people who live in the South, their cars do last longer. I grew up in the North. I grew up in Minnesota, where cars, I don't think they last. Maybe they do now because they're more plastic.
No, I don't think
they used
so.
to rust out a lot.
Yeah, they actually still do, and they're using, in many cases, thinner metals now, so it rusts out even quicker. I mean, I think they probably do some. You probably, if you bought a car in the North, you'd probably want to get it undercoated. But even that, if you don't keep up with that, it's not going to last. So, I mean, I think I'm not an expert on northern driving, but I do think that they recommend every 1 or 2 years to get that undercoating done. I think I don't remember exactly, but it's something that you should keep up with, and you should go through a car wash that does an undercarriage wash, and that's at least get that salt rinsed off before it begins to react with the metal. But yeah, when you're in the North, I mean, 4, 5, 6 years of a car driving on the salt roads, they're going to be rusted out and no good anymore.
Yeah, and the hot and the cold, it gets 20 below and then 95 degrees in the summer, so that there's so much more wear and tear.
Yep.
In the South, I know it gets hot, and it does get cold here in Florida, but not like below zero.
But the South and the West, generally, cars are going to last longer.
Yeah, I think so.
Because there's less salt in general, but then in the West, there's less moisture. So, moisture is another problem that can, because if there's a lot of moisture, it creates problems in the drive, or in the, the brakes and the bearings and all of that. I mean, it's all sealed, but moisture still can get in and create problems.
Is that part of what happens here in Florida? Because you get that ocean air and there's salt in that. That's on the coast.
Okay. I mean, you got to be careful when you buy cars in Florida, because the same issue, you could have some rusting because they live on the coast. Okay. So if somebody takes a car out on the beach, there's some places you could still do that. Usually you could drive on the beach anywhere just about, but there are still places like Daytona where you can drive on the beach. But if you're going to do that, you should just like being up north, you should do an undercarriage wash to get it, to get rid of that salt.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We're getting a little bit we're getting off tangent on, this is more about finances, but yes, it contributes to the problem, because cars, especially up north, and cars and, the areas close to the ocean don't last as long. And so you get upside down on these cars that end up being worth nothing, but you still owe $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I want to ask you more about this, the 50-year home mortgage. Because I don't know a lot about all this, and then we're in the process of trying to buy a house. So for someone my age who's older, I don't think that's a good idea. But for someone who's younger, would a 50-year mortgage be okay, or are you so locked into that you can't move? Are you kind of a slave to the house then, or what does that mean? Because doesn't it mean lower monthly payments if it's longer? Yeah,
I mean, it's longer, but there's a higher interest rate. But when you compare the two, I think I saw something like on a $500,000 home, let's just say, use that as a number.
Okay.
I think I saw something like $200 a month difference. I haven't done the numbers, but by the time you give the extra 20 years, but then you increase the interest rate, it comes down to the 50-year mortgage is $200 cheaper than the 30-year. And it's kind of the same thing between the 30-year and the 15-year, that, you can do a 15-year, which is a lower interest rate, but, obviously you're paying it out quicker. And so the payment is higher on a 15-year than a 30. So it's really kind of another jump from 30 to 50.
So I'm trying to understand this. So let's just say your monthly payment's $2,000 a month. If you're paying a 50-year mortgage, then it would come down to $1,800.
Yes, but that would be the idea.
But then you're paying, in the long run, you're actually paying more in interest, though, right?
In the long run, yes, you're paying much more in interest. It's interesting because even on a 30-year loan, they give you the number that you're paying on interest, and it's astronomical. It's at least the price of the house, in terms of the number. And so you're getting even more than that, with a 50-year loan.
So we had Franklin Roosevelt came out in the 30s and 40s, and he had the 30-year loan. Now here comes Donald Trump, President Trump, and he has the 50-year loan. So I think you mentioned right off the bat, does debt make someone a slave?
Well, it can. Debt can be used as a tool. Not all debt's bad, and especially if you know how to handle it. Unfortunately, most people don't know how to handle it and use it as a tool. So they end up enslaving themselves to the debt. They end up being a debtor or a slave to those who lend the money. And, the 30-year mortgage was bad enough, but at least with the 30-year mortgage, if you bought a house at 30 years old, if you work through your 20s to prepare yourself, you buy a house at 30 and you live and you finance it for 30 years, there's a chance by the time you retire, really, if you buy it at 35 and you retire at 65, you have an opportunity to pay that off before you retire. So it's not something that's on you when you go into, retirement, which generally means making less money. And so the 30-year kind of definitely made more sense. And in general, I would not advise against more a mortgage for 30 years. But what I would say is, on a 30-year mortgage, pay extra toward the principal. So, maybe pay an extra $100 a month. So go to Starbucks less and pay an extra $100 a month, and, get that paid off. Quicker, because if you pay even $100 a month, that you're going to definitely see, a situation where you're going to pay it off quicker, much quicker. And, the other thing that some people do is pay it. Basically, they make, there's 4.33 weeks in a year, or 4.33 weeks in a month. And so some people will pay the basically on a weekly basis, I think it is. And so when you pay on a weekly basis, you actually are paying more than the payment is there. So you're paying extra if you do that. So, there's different tricks of how to do it. And I would definitely do one of those. I would say, if you buy a house on a 30-year loan, put a little extra toward principal. Make sure that it's going toward principal, because you want to make sure that if you make extra payments, that it goes toward principal. Put a little extra toward principal so you can pay it off sooner. So, if you're 50 years old and you buy a house on a 30-year mortgage and you pay it off in 15, by putting extra money toward it, then, you've done, it's a good thing. The nice thing about doing a 30, even though you're spending more on interest, a little bit higher interest rate, usually somewhere, percent and a half, I think it is. And so, even though you're spending more on an interest rate on a 30, the nice thing about a 30 is that if you get into a tight financial position where you can't make extra, you're not forced to, because you have it on a 15. So I think it's a good thing it's good if you have the discipline to, have a 30 and treat it like it's a 15 when you can, and, knowing that you have the ability to kind of back off if finances get tight.
That sounds like good advice. So I'm just going to ask you this question. Do you think we have a housing crisis, or do you think we have an affordable housing crisis?
Well, I think it's probably an affordable housing crisis, that construction costs are going up and up and up. And, property values are rising as well. And, especially with inflation, driven by inflation. And houses have generally appreciated as opposed to depreciated. They've actually grown in value over time. And so we're getting to a point where, wages, especially for people in their 20s and 30s, wages are getting to the point where there's a disparity between the price of homes versus how much people can pay. My daughter and her husband just bought a home, and it's a stretch. I mean, I won't give the numbers because that's their business, but it's a stretch for them. They have to. You end up having to have a dual income, and it actually attributes to the idea of a DINK, dual income, no kids, and because you both parents or both spouses have to work in order to pay for these homes, and when they're working, it makes it harder to have kids because when you're working, you have to put your kids in daycare, which has a huge cost, both in financially, but also to the family in the long run. And so, yeah, I mean, it's creating a problem for those kind of people that it's very difficult for them to find good homes, good starter homes that are affordable.
Yeah. Do you think that the age of ownership, as like we've known it in our lifetime, has ended? Are we in the age of this internal debtor?
Well, I mean, we're definitely going away from the idea of actually having an opportunity to buy a home and pay it off. I mean, it's because they're just so stinking expensive. I don't know what the average home price is, but it's probably somewhere around $400,000. And a $400,000 home is, I mean, that's a big payment that has to be made on a monthly basis. It's definitely in the 2000s for sure. Yeah. And so, that if you're making, let's just say you have a good job, a decent job, and you're making $25 an hour. $25 an hour times 40 is what is that? $1,000 a month or a week. So that's 4,500 ish a month. I mean, just no overtime, no bonus or anything like that. But if you're paying $2,000 for a home loan, that's half your money. Yeah. I hope I did all that math right. Probably need to check it.
Well, I'm not a math guy, so I wouldn't be the guy to check it, but it sounds right to me. So have you heard about there's a lot of foreign investors that are buying just blocks and blocks of homes. Why do you think they're doing that? I don't understand that. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I think it's a national security issue. I mean, I think that having so much foreign ownership of homes means that those people are controlling those homes. They're controlling, and the more they control the market.
Yeah. I when I heard that, I was like, I don't know what's going on with that. They're buying up just neighborhoods and then just renting it to people. Which is that the way you think that's the future, is just maybe renting a house rather than buying it?
Well, yeah. I mean, they want you to own nothing and be happy. Owning nothing, and that's what they're encouraging. And so, yes, I mean, I think that there is coming a time when the homes are controlled by the government. And right now we're still in a kind of the old way. But I think that in the future, if things don't change, then we're going to government ownership, which is no different than communist countries.
Is that coming, you think, faster than we know, or what do you think? How far do you think that is in the future?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, you would hope that Trump would have been a backstop to help, hold that off. But, if you go into a 50-year loan, that's another step towards that, that type of situation.
Yeah. Have you heard that people are renting, like they're renting phones, they're renting computers, they're renting television, like these big screen things, like everything seems to be renting now.
Oh, really? I didn't know to the extent that's going on, but usually those kind of things, come at a high cost.
Yeah.
Usually it's high interest rate that that basically you're paying, because, they've always had, I say always, for many decades, they've had the rent to own stuff. You can go to a, rent to own furniture store but then by the time you figure out how much you're actually paying for it, it's way more than if you just bought it outright. And usually it's worn out by the time you would ever get to the point where you actually own it. And you're basically having to do the same thing again.
Yeah, it's kind of like leasing a car. some people do the leasing until they and then want to buy it. Sometimes,
yeah, I mean, there are times when leasing a car makes sense. For most people, it doesn't.
yeah. So, what do you think would happen if, let's say, Trump just deregulated the housing industry and just said, "Builders, go build"?
Well, I mean, I think that potentially it could help. It could help affordability, but obviously the contractors need to make money out of the homes. So, it would be a situation where because they have to make money out of the home. I don't know how much they would drop the price. I think having less regulation would be a good thing. And I think that would be helpful. But I don't know, what does that look like? I mean, does that look like, codes that aren't as stringent, and permitting is not as stringent in terms of getting, I just don't know what that would look like in terms of how it would actually work itself out.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't either. Somebody was just saying that if it deregulated, because there seems to be a housing shortage in some areas. I know here in Gainesville, I've just been kind of looking around at homes because we were thinking about buying one, and there's a lot that are opening up for sale. And I think, like, you were saying 400,000 is the national average, but I think here in Gainesville, it's like 320, 340 is about the average. And there's a lot of homes out there now that are coming up for sale, especially near the campus. I
mean, the good thing is that means supply is up, and I've heard that. I've read that supply is up, and that's usually a good thing. And unfortunately, though, if we go to the 50-year mortgage, I know there are going to be a ton of people out there taking advantage of it. And what's going to happen is that that's going to raise demand, which is going to raise prices. And so you're basically going to be back to paying what you were paying for a 30-year mortgage for the same house.
Yeah, see, I don't know how that works because that's a math thing, but I just remember when the things I understand are like student loans and credit card bills. What is the interest rate on that? Like a student loan, I think it was like 8 or 7%. Some credit cards are 10%. Some are even 30%. Those are the ones you try to stay away from. What is the interest rate for housing right now? I can't remember. Do you know?
Well, it depends on your credit and the terms of the loan. For a 30-year loan right now, I think it's somewhere in the 6%, 6% or so. You can buy that down some by purchasing. You basically pay the interest up front is what you do. And so you can buy down, they call it buying points. And so you buy it down based on, you have to make a bigger down payment, which part of that is basically prepaying the interest rate. And so that gives you a lower interest rate during the term of the loan.
So if they lowered the interest rate to, like, say 5 or 4, would that help people?
Oh yeah, for sure. It would bring more people into buying. The problem is, again, that would increase demand, which will increase the housing prices. So it's kind of a give or take. I mean, that's why the Fed will raise interest rates in order to slow things down, in order to make, because what it does is it contributes to inflation. So let's just say it's $250,000 house and you have a lower interest rate that you can get. That means that buying that $250,000 house is going to be a lower payment because of the lower interest rate. But if the demand goes up and inflation hits, then you're basically going to have you get wiped out by the inflation is what really happens. And so you end up with basically the same payment for a lesser house.
When you buy a house, are you locked in at an interest rate? Or let's say you do this 50-year mortgage, will you be locked in at an interest rate, or can the interest rate go up as you're doing it?
If you do a 30-year fixed, it doesn't go up.
Okay.
30-year fixed, that's what most people want, is a 30-year fixed rate loan. Some people will do, if you have good credit, some people will do, it's called a variable rate loan. And what they'll do is they'll lock it in for like 3 years, and then it goes to whatever the rate is after 3 years. And that's not a bad thing, because it can save you money on your payment, and especially if you think the interest rates are going to go down, not up. And so it saves you money in the short run. And if the interest rates go down, you can refinance at a lower rate and lock yourself into a 30-year fixed. That's that's possible as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the kind of the options.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a Dave Ramsey guy. I'm not a money guy, but I'm trying to understand some of this as we move forward, because I know that you have to have so much money down. Sometimes I think they expect, I don't know how much. I used to think it was 10% to buy a house. You have to put 10% down, but I don't know.
No, and today you can buy a house for like 3% down. I mean, that's the other side of it. And obviously the less you put down, the higher your payment's going to be. But you can get into a loan for I think 3 to 4% is what I think is what the number is.
Okay. So like,
I mean, like a first time home buyer, or a veteran, military veteran, they definitely don't require as high initial down payment.
Okay. So yeah, this is interesting. This helps me. And you mentioned earlier, there's good debt and bad debt. So the good debt would be a house and maybe a car payment. What would be a bad debt, like a credit card or?
Well, if you do it right, yes. I think that it's good debt to own a house, as long as you buy a house that actually is worth it. Over all things being equal, over the past 50 years, it's been a good investment to buy houses because they've generally appreciated. Cars, I think, are absolutely, because cars are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Most people can't afford to buy them with cash, but I think a better option, quite frankly, is to buy older used cars that have proven quality and drive those, as opposed to driving newer cars. And especially with these predatory loans of that are out there, 84 months, 96 months, and you're even saying as much as a 15-year loan. I haven't heard that one, but I don't doubt it, because these cars are $100,000 plus at this point. And it's like I bought my first house for $82,000, so I can't even imagine spending $100,000 on a car. And and I don't think that's something most Christians should be doing personally. And I'm not binding people there, in terms of their conscience. I mean, you need to do what's according to your conscience. And I don't begrudge somebody driving a nice car, but to spend $100,000 on a car, to me, is just unwise. But that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't understand it, like how a car could cost that much, unless it's self-driving or battery or it can fly, things like that. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I own my Honda is 2013, has 265,000 miles on it, and and it just makes sense to fix it, as opposed to when it breaks, as opposed to buying a new one.
Yeah.
Even a new Civic is going to cost you 30 probably. So $30,000, and which is ridiculous. I mean, I bought my dad bought a 1978 GMC pickup for $5,000 and thought that was ridiculous. Back then, and today, I mean, when I was young, my first vehicle that I purchased for myself was a Chevrolet truck, and I spent like $22,000 for it, and I thought that was crazy. But now they're spending $80,000, $90,000, even over $100,000 for these vehicles.
Yeah, I saw that too, and that kind of made me say, like, I don't think I'll ever buy a brand new car. I think I'll always buy a used car.
No, and you shouldn't, really. You shouldn't. I mean, it's unwise to. I mean, and I know, like, we have people in our church that drive new cars, and I'm not saying that they're in sin for that. Not at all. Hopefully, nobody hears me saying that. And people who do it, maybe they have the means to do it, and it's okay. I mean, God has blessed them in that way, and they're before the Lord making that decision, and they do it. But I'm just telling you, all things being equal, in general, it's better as a Christian to buy something older. It's wiser to buy something older, because you avoid the initial depreciation. So, I mean, as soon as you drive off the lot with a new car, it depreciates, and you're underwater even right off the bat, depending on what your down payment was. And so, it just makes more sense to find something that has proven quality over time and buy that and put money into it, like fix it. And so, as a matter of fact, I was just talking to a friend yesterday who's going to sell potentially going to sell their Toyota 4Runner, and it was a 2004 with 185,000 miles on it. And I was like, you know what? If you sell it, let me know. I'm interested in buying it, depending on how you price it. And so because I know that that's a proven vehicle with proven quality, and people are getting several 100,000 miles out of them if they keep them going. And so that's to me that's a much better model for most Christians is to do those kind of things. But you have to be smart about it. You can't. I mean, if you buy a pile of junk and you're always fixing it, it's going to cost you even more. And so you need to do your research and know what the quality is, and know what you need, what years to avoid and what models to avoid.
Yeah, don't buy a Ford, right? No, I'm just kidding.
No, seriously, Fords are terrible. But in general, they're good. Each car company has good quality in certain models, but not every model is going to be high quality. And Ford is one of the worst in terms of quality overall. But I mean, in terms of American vehicles, that Ford, Chevy's not much better, maybe even as bad in some cases. Dodge, Ram, I guess it is now. Those are not great either. Those haven't historically been great. Historically, the Dodge has been worse quality than both Chevy and Ford over time. And then, but I would suggest avoiding anything that is German, like Mercedes, BMW. They're too expensive to buy, and then the quality's not as good, and they are more expensive to maintain. Volvo's another one that I would avoid because of that. Volkswagen I would avoid. Anything like the Mini Coopers that the British make, I would avoid that. I would avoid anything Japanese. I would recommend Honda, Toyota, not necessarily in that order, but Honda, Toyota, and Mazda. All three have pretty good quality, and I would recommend those, especially when you buy a proven year. But I would stay away from the Germans and the Swedes, the Swedish cars. That's Volvo. I would stay away from those. And I would really, like I say, the Japanese. I would definitely. I always give you a hard time, but I would definitely stay away from the Korean cars, the South Korean cars, the Hyundai and Kia. I would stay away from those because those are basically 100,000 mile cars, and the engine blows up on them. So yeah. And now yours has lasted 260,000 miles or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I keep saying it's the Israelite shoes. It just is not. The Lord's not letting it wear out. But it's tongue in cheek, but I think there's actually some truth to it. So that He's taking care of blessing you in that way. Because of your financial situation, and which is awesome that He's doing that. But in general, I would stay away from those.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's funny how we talk about this, but the Japanese cars have really proven their reliability and their.
Well, they've gone downhill since 20. So
have they? Even a Toyota?
Yeah, Toyota has gone downhill since 2020.
Wow.
And like I say, it goes back to the reason why we were talking about they've thinned out the oils to get better gas mileage, and you can't just go put a thicker oil in it because the oil doesn't flow. They changed the way the oil flows as well and restricted it because it's thinner, and they can. And so they've done that. But so if you put a heavier oil in it, it's not going to the oil's not going to get throughout your engine like it should. So you're forced to stay with the lower viscosity oil, but the lower viscosity oil creates more heat over time. And not only that, but they've also gone to the computer telling you when you need to change your oil. They've gone to that, and mechanics now are saying you need to change your oil every 5,000 miles, even with these newer oils.
Not to make this car talk, but it's interesting because when I lived in the north climate, Minnesota, we do a 530 in the summer, 1030 in the winter. Moved to California, and I think they went to a 520, and here in Florida it's a 520. So I always thought it was just because it was a warmer climate, but is that the new thing now to get better gas mileage? Is everyone's gone to a lighter oil?
That's the biggest reason. I mean, they do go. I mean, definitely viscosity is dictated by the weather. So, and the viscosities for a car that's up in the north potentially is going to have a different viscosity rating than something that's sold in the south. But
which is weird.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the two things that they've done is they thinned out the oils and, for better fuel economy, because the government's making them do that and, get better fuel economy. But they're also adding turbos so that they can have a smaller engine and create more horsepower because of the turbo. But the turbo creates heat, which is not good for the engine. So
what about the semi-synthetic oil that's supposed to give you longer and lasting engines? Is that a good thing?
Well, I think most oil that's sold on the market nowadays is a synthetic oil, and the days of doing it, getting a 3,000 mile oil change, or I don't think you need to get it every 3,000. I think the synthetics are better, have a higher quality in general than the old conventional oil, but you still need to, from what I'm reading and seeing, that 5,000 miles is what people are mechanics are recommending.
Yeah, that's a new thing now, and I'm old school, so I'm still like 3,000 taking it in.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to argue it, because if that's what you've been doing with your car.
I used to change my own oil. That was always fun to do, but I don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But
I used to change mine, but it's better, because the nice thing about having a mechanic do it, if you actually go take it to a mechanic, is that they actually look at your car and let you know if there's things that need to be dealt with. Hopefully you have an honest mechanic that's actually going to tell you what needs to be done, as opposed to just doing things that don't need to be done. But
yeah, and then plus your garage isn't full of these giant containers full of old oil that you didn't know how to get rid of it.
I have a problem with that.
Now you can take them to the places and
you can take them to the auto parts store
they'll get rid
and
of them,
take it back. Yeah, so going back to good or bad debt, you asked about credit cards, and I would argue that any unsecured debt is potentially bad debt. Now there are some exceptions to that, but an unsecured debt is something that you don't have an asset that's backing that up. So like if I buy a house, I own, quote unquote I own the asset that offsets what I owe. So if I were to get into a position where I have to get out of the loan, I can sell the house and pay the loan off, theoretically. And so you can do that with a house, you can do that with a car. Now cars are, more likely to get upside down, like for some of the things we just said. But a credit card, on the other hand, you don't have anything to show for it necessarily, that you can get that you can actually sell and get value out of it. And so, and you go out to dinner and you eat, do it on a credit card. There's no long-term value there. I mean, there's no asset. It's just debt that you've accrued. And especially if you don't pay that off in a reasonable amount of time, then you're just going to end up on a credit card. You're going to end up paying a lot of interest, especially because these credit cards can be, even up into the 20%, 25% interest on some of these credit cards, especially depending on your credit rating. And you're not, unless your credit rating is great, you're not going to get the better rates that way. So it's just one of those things where if you don't protect your credit, it's going to make things worse. And that's all the way around. That's with a home loan. That's with a car loan. That's with, a credit card. You're going to pay more interest when your credit is not as good. So in general, credit card debt is bad because it's unsecured. And it's also bad if I go to the bank and I do a line of credit kind of idea. That can be bad as well because it's not necessarily secured. Also, like doing a second mortgage on your house, so you're financing the equity, you can get yourself in big trouble with doing stuff like that. So, those are that's the kind of debt that I would certainly suggest avoiding.
Right. And it's kind of a catch-22 because don't you have credit card in order to have credit? Like if you just paid cash and bought everything, you have no credit score. So you need a credit score to get credit. So you have to have a credit card.
Yeah, most wise people will recognize that they have to build their credit because they want to buy a house or they want to buy a car. They need to have good credit to do that. And one of the ways to do that is to spend on a credit card, but pay it off at the end of the month if you possibly can. But definitely don't carry that debt for months and months and months because you're paying this huge interest on. And so it's better to pay it off at the end of the month, and that builds your credit. and it also makes things easier to track. I mean, you've got record of it through the credit card of what you purchased, and so Angie and I have done that for years. We use a credit card, and sometimes, many times, we'll pay it off at the end of the month. That's what we're doing right now with the card that we spend on. But there's times that we've floated, and there actually are. I'm kind of hesitant to tell people that there's a trick that you can do if you end up needing to use debt. And there actually is what we call kind of the credit card trick, and it's taking advantage of no interest loan or no interest balance transfers. And so what you do is you spend on a credit card, and if you accrue a balance on that credit card, you can take that balance and transfer it to a different card. And these card companies, because they want you to transfer those assets, these card companies will give you introductory offers. So they'll say no interest for a year. I've seen it up to even 2 years. And so what that does is it allows you to pay off that credit card, without accruing interest. So basically you're living on debt, or you're using debt, not living. You're using debt, but you're not hurting yourself on the other side by paying a huge amount of interest.
Well, that's a good tip.
Well, especially if somebody who is listening to this is struggling with debt, like especially credit card debt, that is a way to get out of it. That is what you do is that they constantly, if your credit is good, if you're keeping up with your payments in general, they're going to send you these credit card offers, and you're going to be able to balance transfer, and many times you can bounce it through 3 or 4 cards and basically be able to pay it off quicker. So yes, I'm not suggesting that somebody live that way. If they don't have to, it's better to pay things with cash or at least pay it off at the end of the month. But there are, like I say, that is a trick that you can do, especially if you get yourself in a bad position. So did you know that one, or did you have any idea?
I've heard people do that. And
okay.
I was going to ask you also, they have these companies that you call up and they'll help you get out of debt. Like they'll negotiate your debt down to a certain thing, and then you pay that off. I don't know if those are any good. I've heard,
I mean, I think it depends. I've never had any experience with those personally, but I think it depends on how they're doing it. I mean, if you bought something on terms, there is the principle that I need to pay it out, based on what I bought it at. But I don't think there's anything wrong with negotiating a lower interest rate or something like that. I don't think it's right to negotiate, pennies on the dollar. I mean, you spent the money, you should probably pay it off. And, because that's your word. You said when you signed that credit card, when you sign that purchase, you're saying, I'm going to pay this off, and you need to be a man or woman of your word. So I don't suggest, trying to get out of something. Now, one of the things that some of these companies do is they do a debt consolidation, which means that, they pay off your debts, and it's in the form of a loan that they make, and then you pay an interest rate to them. And so many times when you do debt consolidation, many times you can get a lower interest rate and pay just one and get things kind of paid off. And it helps if you do it right. It's a help. I mean, you can get out of it. That's another way to get out of it. Out of a debt trap is to use one of those things in the right way. And there are several Christian organizations out there that will do that. Now I don't know. I couldn't tell you which one to go to. You'd have to do your research, to see what the ratings are and what people are saying about it. But there are opportunities to use those things.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think it's to be out of debt is very liberating. And that's why I kind of want to close this off with you today is talk about, as believers, how do we live in this world that is sort of credit crazy? Like even now we're talking about 50-year mortgages and 15-year car loans and all these, Donald Trump is going to hand out stimulus checks and all these things. It just seems like it seems like live now, pay later kind of mentality. But let me just ask you, as believers, how do we navigate through this 2025 and beyond as we go through all this, all this debt, all these mortgages and things like that. What would you recommend?
Well, I mean, I would recommend living below your means. So whatever it costs you to live is less than what you make. And, I would recommend continuing to do that. Now, let me back up and say, first and foremost, I would recommend setting up your tithing that you would give to the Lord first, and then you would go from there. And the reason that is because there is a principle that the Lord blesses those who are generous. And so I would argue that you need to be giving first, and after that, set up the rest of your bills. But in general, living below your means is what we should be doing as Christians. So if I make, $2,000 a week as an example, or $1,500 a week, let's just say $1,500 a week. If I make $1,500 a week, I should live on something less than $1,500 a week, and it's just the right way to do things. And so that means that I wouldn't necessarily have the biggest, nicest house. I can have a nice house. I can have it's not as if we can't have nice things, but I don't have to have the biggest and the nicest. I don't have to keep up with the Joneses. I don't have to have, the brand new $110,000 car. It really gets, when it comes to getting you point A to point B, I can drive a $5,000 car that does the same thing. And there's no prestige there for the Christian. We shouldn't be worried about keeping up with the Joneses. And so I would just say living, a simple life, and that you're not doing too much. You're giving, you're serving, and you're using your wealth to take care of other people, and you're living in a way that isn't, how do you put it? Well, there's a word I'm trying to find. Pretentious. Oh. Pretentious. Yeah. So yeah, I would. That's what I would say. I mean, I think that's the biblical model for how we should live. And it's interesting because even secular guys that are not Christians, like Warren Buffett, from what I understand, lives in the same home he always has. He's multi-billionaire, and he's living in a modest home there in his hometown. And so it actually is a principle that works even for people who don't know the Lord.
Yeah. How important is it to have a house? Do you think or do you think an apartment is fine for some people, or is it okay to want to have a house?
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I think you have to take into account that, that when you own a home, that you're responsible for more than just paying the payment. When you have an apartment, or when you rent a home, your landlord is the one who's taking care of things. They're fixing the garbage disposal. They're fixing. I mean, many apartments have their own. They supply the refrigerator. Refrigerator goes out. They have to fix it. They have to replace it or whatever needs to be done. I mean, and so there is an advantage of renting in that way. And many people do that. Many people say, you know what, we're going to rent because it saves us money in the long run. And that's true if the houses, depending on how the houses appreciate or depreciate. So historically, there's been appreciation. So you end up, making money off of, because the market goes up. And so, but, there's no guarantee with that. So homeownership has been a good thing overall for the past, 50 years. I don't know, going forward with a 50-year loan, I don't know. I mean, I can't say that homeownership is necessarily going to be better going forward. But yeah, I mean, what's better is, buy a home and focus on paying it off and get out of it. Even if you have to go to a 50-year loan, it's better to, it's better if that's what you have to do. It's better to go ahead and pay more so you're not out 50 years. And, paying more is going to build up the equity quicker, which means that when you sell, you have more equity, which means that you can put a bigger down payment on the next home. The Lord leads you that way.
Absolutely. So you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but so what I'm hearing from you is that I should go out and buy a house with a 50-year loan. That's what you're saying, right?
No, I'm not saying that.
So you're saying I'm wrong.
If that's what you believe, I would say you need to make sure.
Oh, I thought I heard you just say that because it was...
No, I said it. What I said is that you can go out and buy a house on a 50-year loan, and maybe that's okay.
That's what I heard. So I got excited.
you shouldn't just pay the minimum. You should pay
Yeah.
more.
No, I'm kidding, because I don't think I'll live 50 years. So
Well,
I don't think I'd be able to pay it off. But no, I was just kind of,
well, that's the other side of it. If you buy a house as a couple and something happens to one or the other, either that home has to be sold or the other, the spouse has to take over the payments. And so, yeah, you want to be careful not to saddle your future self or future wife's situation where she can't afford it and she's out on the street because she can't afford it.
yeah. And I know you're not a prophet. I'm not either. And we're not the son of a prophet. But as you look forward, maybe we can't answer this, but what do you see? What do you think's really going on? Are young kids in their 20s ever going to be able to afford a house someday? Or is this just becoming like no one, like we talked about at the beginning, is anyone going to be able to own anything?
Well, I think there are people in this world, many people in this world. I don't know if it's the majority of people, but there are many people in this world who would say that, more of a communistic model works. And there are young people, because of what's happening, with the affordability of homes, that are saying, no, we need to have a communist system so that you don't have these haves and have-nots. So unfortunately, under a communistic system, everybody's a have-not except for a very small percentage at the top.
Yes.
That's the sad reality of communism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, what would it look like if the government is the one that owns every home and they're the ones that you go to and say, can I buy this or can I live here?
Or can I live here? Yeah. That would be I need a place to live. Can you give me a place to live? And that's a communist idea.
Yeah.
Where the government would own it and we just would use it. And yeah, that's a bad deal. We don't want to go there.
No, it's actually terrifying when you think about it, because they can determine where you're going to live and if you can have a car. No, you can't have a car. Yeah, you can have a car. You can only drive this much though. Okay. They control every part of your life then.
Yes.
So freedom.
Yeah, especially, if you don't have the independence of a car, you can't travel without approval. Those are definitely things that we see in communist countries that we want to avoid if at all possible here in the United States.
Yeah. So there could be something going on behind the scenes that we're not aware. That's trying to do something that is kind of sinister, but we don't know.
Well, yeah. I think we do know.
Yes.
What happened in New York. He's not hiding that he's a communist.
No.
And yet the New York City, elected him, and he wasn't. I don't even think it was close. And so you have a majority of people living in New York City that would rather live under communism, or they don't understand. Like the guy's telling them they're going to have free stuff, and the government's going to foot the bill. Well, they don't understand. The money has to come from somewhere, and
Yes.
The money always comes from us. It always comes from the people. We're the ones who generate that money, and if we're not in a free market system, what ends up happening is everything goes to the lowest common denominator. So nobody wants to try to get ahead because you can't get ahead. Because if I make $100 and if you make $200 and we both get 150, why would I want to work harder to get $200 over your $100? It ends up working to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah. Or if I make $100 and they tax me $80 and I'm taking home 20, what's the use?
Yeah. Especially if you're not getting you're not getting $80 worth of services out of your government, and you won't, because bureaucracies are never efficient.
Yeah. Well, okay. So to wrap this up, to answer the question that I asked at the beginning, does the government want us to own anything? What do you think?
There are definitely people in the world that would want you not to own anything. And, I think that most of the progressive side would fall into that. And so I think it depends on who's in charge, in terms of the government. And, for the most part, it seems like that the more progressives have had more sway. And so it seems like that, they're pushing in that direction. And like I said, you would hope that Trump would be a stopgap for that he would slow down that progression. But with some of the things he's saying lately, financially, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it's hard to know what's going on with the Donald because he's kind of all over the place here.
Yeah, he's. It seems like has kind of lost some momentum recently, and I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if. I hope it's not the bait and switch. You know, the old bait and switch where you tell us that we're going to get all these things, do all these things, and then when you actually get involved, you don't really do them for whatever reasons. I hope it's not that, but I hope it's a blip on the radar, blip on the bump in the road, and we, obviously keep going forward. So
yeah. And
now I will say, speaking of, obviously we're guys who believe in, there's going to be a tribulation, and money's going to be a part of that, and that's how the world is going to be under the control of evil forces of the Antichrist is going to be through financial means. So, you're having to have the mark in order to buy and sell. And we're already seeing the technology that's going to make that possible. We have the computer systems now to keep up with every transaction. We have the technology to put some sort of chip in under your skin in order to purchase. And so, I mean, there's no, it's just the next step that's going to happen. And I think in some limited cases may already be happening. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the primary means that the Antichrist is going to use to control the entire world. From a prophecy standpoint, we're not talking about if, we're talking about when.
Yeah.
And so is it going to be in the next 5 to 10 years that all this happens? Or is it going to be a century or two or three centuries down the road before it happens? But eventually it's happening. I mean, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're getting close to that. You can see it all falling into place easily.
Well, I definitely think we're much closer to it now than we were when I was a young man. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of tongue in cheek. Obviously we're closer, but relatively speaking, we seem closer than ever at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. And so again, hopefully this was helpful. I don't know if it's a 50-year mortgage is the way to go. I don't think a 15-year car loan is the way to go.
No, those things are not the way to go. Yeah, they're unwise for most people. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in the future with money and interest rates and all this fun stuff. So we'll keep you posted. We'll always do a podcast if things like this happen. We'll see where all this is going to lead in the next few years. And I got to go look for a house. So it's like the old saying goes, home is where the mortgage is. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.